I come to class drunk, shit-faced, actually. Now, it's not a personal failing. It's not a cry for help. It's science, social science. I think that's what it's called these days. Allow me to explain. I come to class drunk because I friggin' love it.
Drunk? You're drunk? Everybody's drunk!
All of this is explained. And if you're a social scientist like me, the explanation is always a theory. This is a famous theory, perhaps one of the most famous ones, called the theory of reasoned action. And boy, does it explain why people like me come drunk.
Strong theory.
And before I explain the theory, we got to understand what a construct is. A construct is a bullshit word that sounds smart and that every academic agrees and pretends is real. In the social sciences, we deal with constructs because, of course, we can't deal with atoms and molecules. We deal with a bunch of what I would like to call as vibes. And when those vibes get a name and a definition, they become a construct. Take something as simple as grit. Grit is nothing more than people's perseverance, an individual's perseverance. But some psychologists need a tenure, so they slapped a definition on it, ran a study, and now they all pretend that it's a real thing and that it exists in the world. Boom, you have a construct. And once we have a construct, we start measuring it, usually by making up a questionnaire with a statement like, well, I work hard even when things are difficult. Do you strongly agree or strongly disagree? And just like that, we turn grit into a scientific term. The constructs in the theory of reasoned action. There are basically three constructs that make up the theory: norms and behavioral intent. And in a sense, all behavior is predicted by attitudes, whether or not you want to do something, positive or negative. Subjective norms, as in what do other people think about it? And this predicts behavioral intent, which is, are you going to do this thing or not? So let's break down the constructs that explain why I come to class drunk. It's positive attitudes because, hey, I love being drunk and I don't care, which is some sort of subjective norms, and my students don't care, which means neither me nor anybody I know gives a shit about it. Because of this, my intent, my behavioral intent, is to show up in class drunk.
Relentlessly profound.
If you think the theory is right about it, it's actually wrong. You see, most of the time, prior behavior was a better predictor of behavior itself rather than intentions, attitudes, and subjective norms, all of which are within people's minds. Action was a direct behavioral consequence that predicted action. The authors of the theory of reasoned action knew about this, and they tried to skirt the problem by coming up with this contrived notion of what they call volitional control. Volitional control is this idea that there are behaviors that are under control. So alcohol was something you don't control. Well, I don't control that. Coffee, something you're probably addicted to. Well, the problem was that they were trying to nuance their theory to say, well, the things that people do control, that they do have volitional control, are the only ones that the theory of reasoned actions predicted. They excluded things like voting, because after all, you don't habitually go and vote, correct? Well, wrong. When the theory was actually tested against actual voting patterns in two different countries, in Sweden and the United States, guess what they found? Well, they found that behavioral intent was not a good predictor. People seemed to be voting based on whether or not they had voted in the past. Most first-time voters claim that they will continue voting in future elections, but the actual predictor of consistent voting is whether they voted previously, not whether they intended to vote. People tend to be consistent with their behavior. Many of these things, be it voting, be it job retention, be it career choices, be it even relational commitment, people, couples who express an intention to separate never actually do. And their past commitment, that is staying together, is a better predictor of their future commitment than their stated intentions. All of this undermines the theory of reasoned action.
Are you serious?
But instead of admitting that their model didn't work, they did what psychologists do all the time. They doubled down and created even more complex constructs that try to muddy the waters. So what do? They came up with a new theory. They call this one the theory of planned behavior. The theory of planned behavior is nothing other than the theory of reasoned action with one added variable. perceived behavioral control. And what is perceived behavioral control? It's basically a fancy way of saying, do you think what you're about to do is something you could do? And here's the kicker. Perceived behavioral control is nothing other than your reflection of your past action. It's, if you did something, you know whether you could or could not do it. So there's redundancy for you. You see, this is a hidden truth about a lot of the so-called social science research on psychology. And for that matter, a lot of research that is in the social sciences. The best predictor of what someone's going to do is what they did in the past. That's right. The simplest way to predict what someone will do tomorrow is to look at what they did yesterday. You don't really need a theory, you need a calendar. But you don't need to take my word for it. Let's look at a meta analysis, this one of condom use, right? So here we have a meta analysis of that covers about 96 different data sets. So there are, at minimum, 96 different researchers who applied the theory of reasoned action and the theory of planned behavior to understand the use of condoms. So what did they find? What they found was that past behavior was the strongest predictor of condom use. It wasn't intentions, it was basically intentions correlated with past behavior rather than intentions correlated with future behavior. If someone wore a condom in the past, they were more likely to do it. And if someone said they were going to do it and hadn't done it in the past, they weren't very likely to do it. Subjective norms disappeared when past behavior was considered. In other words, the moment you started putting in subjective norms, past behavior didn't matter. Nor did perceived behavioral control, which also correlated more strongly with past behavior. Like I said in the past behavior was nothing other than perceived behavioral control, and perceived behavioral control was nothing other than past behavior. So when past behavior is added into the equation, perceived behavioral control almost became irrelevant. It is a redundant construct that was added basically for nothing other than to muddy the waters. It did not improve predictive power. Last but not the least, what we end up with this is realizing some conclusions that they made themselves. Intentions correlate more strongly with past behavior than future behavior. And the more one had performed the behavior in the past, the more likely it is that one would perceive control over that behavior. So if you gave me these results, what would our conclusions be? Well, our conclusions would include things like, well, the theory of planned behaviors claims that perceived behavioral control significantly predicts behavior is largely debunked. Past behavior is the best predictor of future behavior, meaning people don't rely as much on their control perceptions, attitudes, or social norms as the theory of planned behavior suggests. Even when people think they have control, perceived behavioral control, their actions are still dictated more by past behavior than by rational planning. The theory of planned behavior doesn't significantly improve upon the theory of reasoned action.
Son of a bitch!
So you would think that after seeing their own data demolish these theories, the authors would conclude that, hey, maybe we've been getting this wrong. But no, they still claimed that TRA and TPB are highly predictive models.
Are you serious? Are you serious right now?
The question you've got to ask then is, who's all this really for? Well, it's not for the average person. It's for a very specific world of people. This is a self-referential echo chamber of academics and grant agencies who thrive on jargon and frameworks. They're built for people wanting or with a psychology degree or whatever other degree in the social sciences people get these days, all of whom need to cite something in their papers, in their theses, and their dissertations. Every time someone writes a grant proposal or defends a thesis, they're pulling out of the same construct bag. They're going to come up with words like attitudes, norms, behavioral control, and more, saying, oh, look, my work aligns with this established framework written by Marty, written by this other guy. And it's even backed by meta-analysis. And here's that one statement in that meta that says it works. There are millions and millions of dollars in grant money floating around, courtesy of organizations like the National Institute of Health, the National Science Foundation, and a host of all the others. All this money is awarded based on whether or not you have a framework in your research. It's reviewed by other grantees and grantors and grant agencies who are a host of people who came out of the same ecosystem. They all want constructs, they all want evidence-based framework, even though none of them either care about the evidence in the framework or they just assume, having not read it, that these frameworks work. It's not about discovery, it's about ritual. It's about keeping the machinery of academia running. There's a dark side to it. There are many students who walk into these universities bright-eyed and eager who come out with these same words that becomes part of the everyday vocabulary. If you're a junior researcher, you're too busy playing the game and continuing on. No one questions the established dogma. The result is an endless mountain of constructs that sound smart, but basically explain nothing. All this happens when science itself is built with an illusion of ideas. When that happens, there is no role for facts. It's why we live in a society where feelings matter more than facts, where we're willing to tweak the truth because there is no concept of truth, because the science and the social sciences are to blame for this. I've gone away from facts to basically making up terms to make people feel justified in their position.
Academia, and I have to say, in my view, it is the supreme achievement of academics ever.
An endless series of fact-free constructs is why we are where we are. Tens of thousands of constructs that are absolutely meaningless. Given the state of the social sciences, now you know why I come to class drunk.